What's going on, everybody? Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and whatever time it is, and welcome back to yet another video with you, man, Immersionholic. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another faction overview for the divided Impera Overhaul Monfort Total War Rome 2. Today, finally, ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to announce we are checking out Egypt. This has been a long requested faction. But I'm kind of glad that I waited because it's had a couple extra units added to the roster over the last few updates, and with the new Grand Campaign revised submod that's been added to the Steam Workshop at the time of this recording, Egypt has some very interesting changes, so I really think that you guys will be glad that we've waited this long. But now, ladies and gentlemen, threat no longer, it is time for us to check out Egypt. But do please keep in mind, I am using the Grand Campaign revised submod for this overview. That's because that submod will be added to the Divided Impera mod in general eventually. There hasn't been any official timeline announced on that, although I suspect we'll probably see that in the next major DEI update, probably coming out sometime in December, maybe January, somewhere in the winter is what I expect, but I haven't heard anything that I can really say concrete. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, let's jump in and check out Egypt for Divided Impera. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, we have a long faction overview to cover here. The Egyptians have a lot to talk about, so I'll try to get through this part as quickly as I can. The Ptolemaioi, otherwise known as Egypt, which is ruled by the Ptolemy dynasty at this point, is part of the Diadochoi cultural group, which you share with Macedon, the Seleucids, Bactria, and Epirus, so you share the following two buffs with them. Number 1, Alexander's Legacy, minus 20% resistance to foreign occupation. Really nice, helps you out when you're conquering areas that don't have your culture, so that's really nice. Then you also have the Successor Conflicts buff, which gives you plus 10 morale for all units during battles against Hellenic factions. This will only really be helpful for you where you're fighting factions that are not Bactria, Seleucids, Macedon, Epirus, because all of them get the exact same buff as you. So when you're fighting, say, Athens, Sparta, Rhodes, Knossos, all those types of factions, that's when you'll notice that you'll have a little bit of a morale edge over them. However, just for Egypt though, we have the Ptolemaic Enlightenment buff, which increases your research rate, which is always nice. You then have the Naval Prowess buff, which increases experience rank for Egyptian ship recruits. So you get plus 1 XP rank to any new ship that you recruit, although I believe it's dedicated more so to the smaller ships, because when I was testing this out, there was a particular ship that wouldn't get an XP buff when I recruited it. But perhaps I could show you guys that when we get into the Grand Campaign map. But it's not a big deal. The majority of your ships will have plus 1 XP, so they get 1 extra melee attack and 1 extra melee defense, which is always nice. Gives you a little bit of an edge over your opponents. Then we have the Foreign Dynasty debuff, which increases public order penalties due to presence of foreign cultures, basically cancelling out the Alexander's Legacy's buff. So that's going to be an issue for you, and it will tie in later into the Grand Campaign section where we talk about public order and how much of an issue it is for the Ptolemies. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's it now, so let's jump on in to the Grand Campaign situation and check out what's going on for the Ptolemies. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, let's check it out and see what's going on for Egypt in the Grand Campaign. As you can see, we are finally not a one-hitter quitter. Instead, we are probably the biggest hitter to be a quitter faction there is, because we have 10 cities going from left to right, west to east. We have the province of Libya, where you have 2 cities. You have Paraetonion and Ammonium, where you have the Oracle of Ammon, which is one of your wonders. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. You have Alexandria, which is your capital, of course. It has one of your 2 standing armies at the beginning of the game, led by your pharaoh, Ptolemy II. You have Alexandria in the province of Aegyptos, aka Egypt. You have Myos Homos, Diospolis, and Memphis. Memphis, by the way, has grain, Myos Homos, salt, Diospolis, iron, and then Paraetonion has fish. So nothing too crazy, but it is very nice to have those resources. Helps the AI want to trade with you. But working our way up to the northeast, we have Jerusalem in the province of Yehuda. We have Jerusalem. We have the city of Tyros, which has purple dye as a resource. And then you have this city of Salamis on Cyprus, which has glass available. So that's very nice for you as well. And then for your final city, we have the city of Side, or Sid, or however you want to pronounce it. I just call it Side because, it's how it's spelled. No resources there, and it is entirely on its own in the province of Galatia et Cappadocia, or Galatia and Cappadocia. So that's what's going on for Egypt in terms of what you have at the beginning of the campaign. Oh, and Jerusalem has your second standing army led by one of your generals, but that's it. You don't have any other navies, you don't have any agents, you don't have any other armies. All you have is 2 standing armies at the beginning of the game. But that's fine, because you have a lot of money. Look at that, 6,500 income on turn 1. I don't think I've ever seen such a large income for any faction on turn 1. And it's fitting though, because Egypt is probably one of the most powerful factions in the game in terms of economy. You have one of the best provinces, Egyptos, on turn 1, completely full and ready to be built up, especially to those of you who love to micromanage your buildings and really min-max, get the most bang for your buck. Egyptos will provide you with some of the most insane amounts of money that a single province can offer you. Look at Alexandria on turn 1. It's giving you 2,400 income just in that single city. That's disgusting, man. Oh, and of course, we also have 2 wonders in the province of Egyptos. We have the Pharos of Alexandria in Alexandria. Then in Memphis, we have the Pyramids of Giza. I am not going to cover the wonders for every faction now that they've been added, because I've already done a wonders guide. If you somehow missed that, I'll be sure to try and link that down below in a pinned post. I have already released the wonders guide live on the YouTube channel now, so please do go check it out. I go through literally every single wonder in the game, talk about every little benefit that they give you and any debuff they give you, of course, where they're located and what starting faction has it at the beginning of the game. So if you want to know more about the wonders, I really recommend you go check out that guide. It will help you out massively if you're new to the wonders, of course, which pretty much everyone is, because they have only just been added to the game, although they were in before as a regional effect down here in the bottom left, but now they're a little bit more substantial and you get to actually see how powerful their buffs can be. So continuing with your starting position, one thing you need to understand is that one, you have 2 full provinces, the province of Egyptos and Yehuda over here in Palestine. They are completely under your control, so immediately you can start issuing edicts if you like. That's really, really nice. It's very rare to have your own fully completed province. And then the other province you have cities in Libya, it's 2 out of 4. And you're at war with one of those factions, so you'll conquer it pretty easily and get that province under your control nice and quickly, which would be good, so you can start to build up Libya, which is very desolate and needs a lot of basically love and care and attention. Unfortunately, for your 1 city up in southern Anatolia, it is 1 city out of 4 in the whole province, and it's not going to be very easy for you to conquer the rest of that province. It's going to be a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to deal with the Libyans, Galatians, and the Seleucids, of course. But because you have so many cities and so much territory, it's a very nice thing because it gives you a good economy on turn 1, but you have a lot of places to defend, at least to an extent. One of the benefits you kind of have is that you have this massive kingdom, right? But there is only certain kind of avenues or alleyways almost in which you can be attacked. For example, when these Seleucids declare war on you, which they almost always will, they will have to come marching down this highway. And to do that, they need to get through Tyros right here. They need to cross this river choke point, which is really nice, by the way. If you lose Tyros, use that river. Then they have to get through the walled settlement of Jerusalem. They also need to get past Petra and the Nabateans, who often end up going to war with the Seleucids. And then they have to come down here, and they have to get across the Nile. And only then do they get to your capital of Alexandria, which is a beautiful walled city, which is very easy to defend. So, even though the Seleucids do border you and are in a good position to mess you up, they have to do a very long march to come down and get to you. So basically, you have to screw up pretty bad for the Seleucids to come down and wipe you out, at least quickly anyway. You also have the city of Salamis that the Seleucids will attack. They'll do a naval invasion. They sometimes also land armies. You can see here that there isn't any cliffs on this side of the island, just around the city at least, so they can land outside of it and then assault. And they will do that, so do watch out for that. You might want to place a general with a small garrison there. help basically grind the Seleucids down on the island, keep them bogged down before they can send more troops down. And then to the west, you only have two avenues of attack. You have this road way down here in the center of Libya, and along that road is where people will suffer attrition. I believe if they like really follow it, then they can avoid attrition, but they have to be like really specific, and the AI will sometimes just like cut across a little bit. They'll get stuck in a desert. They can't go off to the side, so you know they're going to be coming in along this road. And because they're going to come along this road, you know they have to go through the city of Ammonium or through your coastal little city up here of Paraetonion. And I'll follow the road along there as well. However, obviously you also have the entire ocean, all of the Mediterranean at least, where they can come in and invade you. It's not too common that you'll get naval invasions on your heartland. You will see navies come and like try to blockade Alexandria, possibly Paraetonion, but you know that's kind of the extent of it. I mean, obviously besides Cyprus, but your navy is also amazing. You have one of the best navies in the game, almost the best. It's probably in the top 3. I would go to guess, maybe top 4 or 5. But anyway, you can defend your coastal cities with a navy if you can afford it, which you should be able to because you have an amazing economy. But anyway, now let's move on to talking about your dual culture system for Egypt. So one thing you have to deal with as Egypt is pretty big public order issues. Even in your capital on turn 1, you have -6 public order, although you do have an army in there, but still. Over here in the west, in Libya, you have -13 public order. Jerusalem, -21 public order. And the city of Sidon up here in the north, -8 public order, all on turn 1. There's a couple reasons for that, but the main reason is cultural differences. If you look over your culture, what would you call that? I guess culture measurement? Well, it says culture details, so we'll go with that. You do not have the majority of your culture in any single province that you have. You almost have it in the city of Sidon up here. Hellenic is at 40% and increasing, so you will get it quickly there, but still, you have Celtic influence coming in, and you still have Persian influence to get rid of. In Palestine, you have 50% Judaic, 50% Persian, and 0% Hellenic. 0% Hellenic. So this entire province is going to be a very big pain in the butt to try and contain that public order. Egypt itself, it's not as bad, but it's still not great. 40% Hellenic, 60% Egyptian. In Libya, 0% Hellenic. Desert Nomadic is 50%, and Egyptian is 50%. So obviously, you have to deal with massive cultural issues. You are a Greek, Hellenic ruling class of an Egyptian people, basically, an Egyptian nation. And not only do you have that starting issues, but as you start building your temples to try and increase public order, you have a really big issue because almost every single temple that you can build increases Egyptian culture and Hellenic culture. They're all to different varying degrees. Some have the majority of Hellenic coming in. For example, the Shrine of Amun-Zeus has +2 Egyptian but +4 Hellenic. So Hellenic will do pretty well. However, Egyptian still will increase. The Hellenic will not get rid of the Egyptian. And so you will basically have that Egyptian culture constantly eating away at you. Unless you do what I would recommend, which is trying to build the Shrine of Athena. This is the only temple that does not increase your Egyptian culture. You get +1 Hellenic, +2 Hellenic for the tier 3, and then +3 Hellenic for the tier 4. It's not ideal, and the consecrated ground still gives +1 cultural influence, although I believe once you upgrade, that goes away, I believe, not 100%. But you'll still have Egyptian cultural influence increasing, but still you might want to focus on just getting the Temple of Athena upgraded to really try and slow down your issues with the Egyptian culture basically being a constant thorn in your side. Besides that, you can try to use dignitaries to increase happiness and public order, of course. You can try to use spies as well, champions. You can do all of that to try and minimize public order issues, increase your own culture. However, it's basically going to be a long-term thing that you have to deal with, so you really need to design at least one of your major cities in your provinces to be focused heavily on dealing with public order issues. You're going to be building a lot of like little mini coliseums and amphitheaters and what around your major cities. That will help you out a lot. You might even want to focus your edicts, especially in the more troublesome areas, on trying to help your public order with the bread and games edict, for example. So just do keep that in mind. Egypt is one of the few factions that has a dual cultural system, and they've had it for a really long time now, and I've seen it be a constant complaint when people are talking about the difficulty of Egypt. That's usually the number one thing that comes up, is that the culture causes constant public order issues, which you can deal with because you have a lot of money, but you do kind of get busy. But we'll talk about that after we do your diplomacy. So your diplomacy, first off, with the Grand Campaign Revised submod install, we are now at war with Cyrenaica on turn 1. They are not a client state of yours anymore. I believe they used to be a client state, but then they would rebel because they hated you, and then they would declare war. Now you're just openly at war with them. There's no ifs or buts about it. You can't really avoid it. I mean, you could probably pay them off. But yeah, basically, within the first 10 turns, you need to deal with Cyrenaica. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, these Seleucids are going to come knocking on your door almost guaranteed within the first 5 to 10 turns. I've done a lot of test campaigns as Egypt. I've done a lot of full playthroughs as Egypt. Every single playthrough I've ever done, the Seleucids declare war on me, usually within 5 turns, although I've seen them kind of push it back to like 20 or 30 turns in, depending on how the AI is doing and all of that. Especially if you're playing on a harder difficulty, they will come for you. And the Seleucids are better early on than what you are, because you don't have access to your really good units, whereas the Seleucids do. So early on, the Seleucids have the military advantage over you. You have the economy advantage and the terrain advantage, arguably, but the Seleucids are stronger than you early on, in my opinion anyway. So for the rest of your diplomacy, you have Athens, for example. They have trade with you. They're more than willing to do non-aggression and other things with you as well. You can even get money from them. They are a client state of Macedon, so you might want to be careful who you side with in the Greek affairs up here. The Macedonians usually will end up fighting Sparta now, and possibly Rhodes and Knossos. Who knows who else? This Grand Campaign Revised somewhat has kind of changed the way that the Greek world interacts with each other. So I would definitely continue pursuing your alliance with the Greeks if you can, especially like Rhodes. Rhodes is usually a pretty good faction, maybe even Pergamon. But that might mean that the Macedonians and whatnot will hate you for it. So just try to be aware of who is fighting who in the Greek world. But basically, you start off as friends with the Athenians with a trade agreement. And you also start off as friends with the Nabateans down here to your southeast. You have a trade agreement with them, nothing else yet. They are more than willing to do more with you. And as is the majority of your neighbors to the north. Most of the Greeks like you. The Lydians don't, obviously, because there is client state of the Seleucids. Besides that, most of the Arab factions like you and will do diplomacy with you. However, the African factions don't like you. Bedewi, Axum, the Blamier, they will mostly all come for you, especially once all 3 are wiped out and one of them is like the kingpin of that area of Africa. They will either attack the Arabs across the Red Sea or they will come up towards you, which is the more common thing that they do. So you will have to wipe out the Africans pretty quickly, as well as the Libyans to your west. Like I said, you're already at war with Cyrenaica, but the Nasamones, they don't like you and will often declare war on you, might even make an alliance with Cyrenaica. And then to the west of them, you have like the Garamantians and such, and they don't hate you early on, but if you're killing other people that are part of their culture, such as the Nasamones, they will probably consider you hostile, especially since you're a big empire. Most factions that don't already know you probably won't like you too much if you're a big empire, since they have that expansionism debuff. So that's your diplomacy situation. You can basically ally with any Greek faction you want. The Seleucids will declare war on you very, very quickly, so try to prepare for that. Nabateans and most of the other Arabs like you, so try to pursue alliances with them to help you against these Seleucids and whoever else, especially the Africans. Africans don't like you. Libyans and other African factions to the west won't really like you either and will generally join in wars against you, especially if you're already in a bunch of wars. The more wars you get into, the more confident the AI is going to feel about attacking you. But that's your diplomacy, basically. Be wary of the Seleucids. They're your number 1 threat early on. So next up, your economy. Well, like I said, you have one of the best economies in the game. You can micro the crap out of your provinces, especially Egyptos, and do really, really well with it. And the best thing about your economy is that you have options. Just because you have Egyptos doesn't mean that you have to completely specialize on agriculture and try to sell your food with the where is it, export food edict, where is it, here it is, export food. You can make a massive amount of money from it if you like, but you don't have to. You could focus more so on trade, commerce, and maybe industry instead, because you do have resources throughout all of your regions. Your resources aren't really all that amazing in terms of the money they generate, but it does make the AI really, really keen to trade with you. So you're going to have a lot of factions coming into trade. The only thing I would really caution you against is if you want to have a trade-focused economy, which I usually try to go with. I really prefer trading because it creates diplomacy, and diplomacy creates drama between factions, politics, and, you know, a little bit of, dare I say it, immersion. But if you want to do a commerce-focused economy, make sure you defend the crap out of Alexandria. Because all it takes is one navy to come in, blockade Alexandria, and you lose the majority of your trade coming in. Well, you lose all of your trade coming in from the ocean, which is really, really big. That's a big deal. If you do lose the city of Alexandria and move, like, say, your capital to Jerusalem for whatever reason or somewhere else, you do have other coastal cities you could get trade coming in from. But since Alexandria is your capital, it will stop trade flowing into you. I believe you should still keep getting land trade coming through, but you don't really have all that many factions that you'll be trading with via land anyway. The Nabateans, maybe. Who else? Maybe the Galatians if you border them eventually. But that's kind of it. There's not many land factions that will be trading with you, at least not early on. So just be wary. Make sure you protect the crap out of Alexandria. Build a navy. You have the money for it, especially if you build the correct buildings. Now, the final thing that we need to talk about, at least the final big thing, is population. What is the Egyptian situation for population? Well, they have basically the highest amount of cities that any faction in the game has on turn 1, so you would think that they are doing excellent. Well, they are. There's no way around it. The population that you have available is fantastic, especially because your military is really good in terms of diversity. You have units like these pikemen that come from your warrior social class, which is really big. 7,000 men just in Alexandria for your warrior class is fantastic. But you then have all of like these native units that come from the quote-unquote foreigner social class, or the Lao social class. So you could get a massive amount of Egyptian bowmen, Egyptian archers, Judean slingers, any other unit that comes from that social class, you can absolutely spam the crap out of, which you'll need to try and allow your armies to cover multiple fronts. You then also have really good mercenaries coming in. You have faction mercenaries, which only spawn for your faction. So you have the Carian levies, which are not bad at all. You have some Cilician or Cilician. I usually go with Cilician Peltis as a soft C. But anyway, you have those Peltis available, and they're really good because they have really good armor-piercing damage. So they're basically axe javelin men. You have the Ethiopian hired archers, Galatians, sellswords. Galatian units are some of the best swordsmen that there are, at least the most cost-effective swordsmen. And that's just available on turn 1. So it's going to get better as time goes on, obviously. So to get to hard numbers, Alexandria, for example, has 52,000 people living in it on turn 1. That's probably like one of the biggest population centers in the entire map. Memphis has 43,000. Mios Homos, 34,000. Diospolis, 34,000. As we go to the east, we see similar numbers, like Jerusalem, 34, Tyros, 34, Salamis, 29. City of Sidon is at 29, although it doesn't matter because it's kind of out on its own anyway. Your only issue with population is in the west. Praetonion only has 15,000, and the city of Ammonium only has 15,000 as well. And you're not really going to get much more as you continue going west, because the only other Greek faction is Cyrenaica. So once you take Cyrenaica, that's basically going to have to be your military hub for replenishing your armies and recruiting troops as you continue going west towards Carthage and the other Numidian tribes way out there. So basically, as you begin to get out into areas that don't have Greek culture in it, that's where you'll struggle to replenish your professional Greek troops. However, if you're using very native focused armies, for example, you're using these kinds of archer units and the swordsmen that you eventually get, the Egyptian swordsmen, and you say you invade down here into the Horn of Africa, you'll be doing okay down there because you'll get a lot of foreigner population. Same thing in Arabia. And then as you come up into the Seleucid territory, you'll have Greek population centers where you will be able to replenish your warrior class. So really your only major issue is going west, which makes sense because you're expanding largely into desert and inhospitable areas, right? So just be wary of that as you continue your expansion into the west. But yeah, that's basically it for population. Overall, it's looking fantastic. You just need to use a little bit of common sense. For example, if you want to use an entire army full of pikemen and you're marching west, eventually you're going to have to, cut down on how many pikemen units you get and merge them together to basically ensure that you have full strength units. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're almost done with the Greek campaign overview. I know it's been a little bit of a long time for this one here. Egypt has a lot to talk about, though, and it's going to be hard to make this overview not too long. But anyway, one last final point I want to add, before we look at the family tree, that is that Egypt and Jerusalem is fantastic recruiting centers, not just because of their population, but look at this. We click on our army, recruit units. I want to get some pikemen. Let's see how many I could get. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 units within one single turn. That is disgusting. That is so big. That means basically within 2 turns you get half a full stack army. 3 turns you almost have a full army. 4 turns you're rocking and rolling. Actually 3 turns would be 18 units. So yeah, 3 turns and you basically have a full army and you have mercenaries to recruit. So I could get these guys and within turn 1 I'm going to have 10 units in my first army. And that's without me, trying or being all that selective and everything. So that's just absolutely crazy. It helps you massively because you're going to need to really use Alexandria as a hub for recruitment for your professional Hellenic style armies, especially. On the other hand, in Jerusalem, it's not as good, but it's still pretty friggin' good. We get 1, 2, 3, 4 units. 4 units in a single turn is actually not unheard of, but it's just really strong considering this isn't your capital. This is just a capital of a province. So Jerusalem would be a good recruiting center for you, especially if you can get that public order under control. But yeah, basically you have just really good options for recruiting armies very quickly. So even if you say you march an army out here, you beat Cyrenaica, you defeat the Nesomones, but by the time you get out here, maybe you've had a few harsh summers, the desert attrition is getting to you. Now it's time to basically come back east and maybe say your army's really depleted. It might just be best to disband it out here and then recruit another army here. Because, it takes what? 1, 2, 3, 4 turns, 5 turns to get to Argilla from Alexandria. In those 5 turns, you could have a brand new full stack army in Alexandria and have already moved away 2 turns going east. Because really all you need is like 3 turns in Alexandria. And you can have a full stack army. 2, if you recruit 12 units here and then move your army as far east as it can go, recruit some more men while you're just chilling here. And then recruit more guys from here. And you don't need to be in Alexandria, by the way. It's in the entire province of Egyptos. And then continue your march east. Although you do suffer from attrition just out along here, along the Nile, because of this swampy area here. It's a very tiny area, so usually it wouldn't make much of a difference, but I just landed on like the one spot I shouldn't have for attrition. But anyway, yeah, I feel like that's a really underrated thing that some people might not realize until they start playing at Egypt. You can spam the crap out of armies. Alexandria is basically what Rome will become eventually. Although it kind of is, I guess, at the start of the campaign. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, very quickly as well, let's show you guys the family tree of the Egyptians. Not really a big deal. I mean, it's nice that it has the historical family tree now. You have Ptolemy the First up here. His wife, Berenice or Berenice. Ptolemy the Second is your pharaoh, 27 years old, married to Arsinoe, who's 33. They have a son, Ptolemy the Third, who you can declare an heir on turn 1, even though he's only 8 years old. Then you have Berenice, and then you have Lysimachus as well. So, you have a few children, which is really cool. I'm not sure why Lysimachus is declared an heir on turn 1. I'm sure there's some historical reason for that. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for the Grand Campaign situation for Egypt. Very promising faction. It's looking really good for them so far, looking to be one of the most powerful factions there is. So, now let's go to the part 2 section of this video and check out their military and see just how powerful Egypt is. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the part 2 section of this video. We'll be checking out the military of Egypt. Ladies and gentlemen, before we jump into the land army, I just very quickly want to go over the navy of Egypt. I know a lot of you guys would probably prefer I load it into a battle map and cover this, but Egypt has a freaking massive military with a lot to talk about, and so this faction overview is getting way out of control already. So I'm just going to quickly go over some main points about the Egyptian navy. And the first one is that it's one of the best navies there is. It's really, really good. Why is it good? Because one, it has diversity, and not just diversity in unit types, because there isn't really a lot of unit types that you can get for a navy. You basically have marines like these guys right here, or you have archers, or you have slingers. Egypt has all of those, thankfully, although the Rhodian slingers, I believe, are not part of their core roster, as are the Cretan archers for their naval vessels. But instead you get them from these cities close by, I believe, because I couldn't find them listed in the naval ports when I was on the Grand Campaign map, but it might have just been like a small technical issue on my end. But the main thing is that you get massive variety in the size of your ships. And basically, if you want to have a good navy, you need to have very large ships, and Egypt has freaking massive ones. If we just look at the admirals, you have a Scorpion ship right here. It just has 500 health, pretty small, 80 crew. We bump it up though to 140 men, and these guys are Marines. And these guys have a ship health of 880, and then we bump it up even more to 2,200 ship health. That is absolutely massive, and a crew of 200 Egyptian Marines, which are good, solid Marines too. Not as good as Rhodian Marines, but they're still up there. And then we jump up to another type of ship that has basically the same health and stats overall as well. But we also go a little bit further for your regular ships. It's not just your admirals that do really well. It goes for all of your marines. You have basically that progression or that diversity in sizes of ships that you want. Do you want a very small but very fast-paced navy, or do you want to have these big juggernaut factions, the assault Xerxes, for example, which has a 1,500 ship health and 160 men on a crew? That's massive. That's just insane. And so that's the main thing about the Egyptian navy. You can get massive ships with very large ship health, and you can get most of your navy on turn 1, I believe. I mean, that is, they're available too. You do obviously need to upgrade your naval dockyard and whatnot, but you get marines, you get archers, you get slingers. You have a lot of options, and your ship health for all of your ships is fantastic. If you want it to be, you can recruit the cheaper, smaller ship health size ships, but I wouldn't recommend that, because you're going to be going up against the Seleucids and other Greek factions that also have good navies that are similar to yours, at least in terms of skill and whatnot, although you do have the extra experience being Egypt. So the bottom line is that Egypt has a large variety. They have very powerful ships, and they have some decent solid marines overall as well. You'll probably be wanting to use your marines in conjunction with a few archer ships to try and set a blaze to some of the enemy ships, or you might just want to use them for morale penalties. And you probably want to get your admiral involved as well, since they have such a massive ship health of 2,200. That's almost ridiculous. It's just super powerful. Let's very quickly just compare that to the Carthaginian navy. Egypt has more variety than Carthage. And Carthage is the absolute epitome of elite navies. At least they should be historically, right? But Egypt does have more variety, not by a massive margin, mind you. Carthage is still fantastic, but they don't have the size that your ships do. The largest ship health that they get is only 2,000, which is for their admiral. For their regular marines, they go only up to 1,500 right here. So Egypt, I mean, you know, at face value, has a better navy than Carthage. So do keep that in mind. Your navy is very powerful. Make sure you use it in your campaigns, and in head-to-head campaigns as well, can really tip the scales in your favor. But that's basically all I wanted to say about the Egyptian navy. I know I could go through and showcase all of their ships, but we've already wasted a lot of time, or at least used up a lot of time. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for the navy. If you have any questions, feel free to post them down below, and I will try to help you guys out. But bottom line is, use your big ships, and you have a lot of them. They are expensive, but you're Egypt, you're rolling in money, you can do whatever you want with them. So now let's jump into the land units part of this overview and see what the Egyptian army has to offer. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the land military, or the army of Egypt. And now this is going to be friggin' long. As you can see, we have almost 40 units. I think we had 30 something when I was setting this up, so we have a lot. I've included 2 AOR units in this overview, but they are just strictly AOR units. There is also an auxiliary unit that I will include because it's part of the core roster, since it's an auxiliary. Although I believe it's also not dependent on where you're recruiting it, rather that it's just a auxiliary you get in your main barracks. But there are some other AOR units that you can recruit for, say, online battles that I haven't included, such as the Cretan infantry, that are really low tier and hardly worth mentioning. But basically, Egypt has access to a lot more than just what you're seeing here, which is already massive. You have a lot of men to choose from and a lot of variety once again. So anyway, now that that little caveat is out of the way, let's do our best here to try and get through the Egyptian roster, ladies and gentlemen. I really do hope that these videos help you guys out a lot, because it's taken a lot of time to put together. But anyway, yeah, just there's been more than one reason that I've put off doing Egypt for so long, and this is one of them. The size is just too big, and I know that's what she said. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, your general, the Sacred Squadron unit. I'm not sure if you can get the late Sacred Squadron unit as a general as well. I wasn't able to in my campaigns nor in custom battles, so I would think you could, but I couldn't find out a way how to do it. So it might just be me once again being a bit of a muppet. But what I do know is that Sacred Squadron Cavalry is one of your only cavalry units that you get access to as a general. Besides this, you have 2 units of infantry to choose from. The Sacred Squadron Cav is pretty good, but it is only a shock cavalry unit. Once again, I know I've said this a lot, but I'll reiterate. The way that you could tell a unit is a shock cavalry unit is not by reading the UI. Like when I hover over it, I know it says very heavy shock cavalry, but it says shock cavalry for a lot of cav that actually isn't shock. And that's due to helping the AI actually use their cavalry in a shock manner. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. The main way you tell if a cavalry unit is a shock cavalry unit or not is their defense. Look at their defense. If it's low, particularly in the single digits like this, and you see their melee attack being super high like this, melee attack of 15, defense of 6, these guys are all about the shock. And obviously they also have their lances, so that helps you identify them as well. But basically, you cannot allow them to get stuck in combat. They do have heavy armor, so they'll last for a little while, but they won't get many kills in a long engagement, and then they will just start to get whittled down, and you might be surprised on the kind of lower tier units that can grind these guys down. A medium melee cav unit will grind these guys down if they don't get a really good charge against them. That is to say that if the Sacred Squadron doesn't get a good charge. But anyway, that's your General's Cavalry unit. I always recommend using Cav for General, so even though it is just a shock unit, I would still recommend you try to use it. But anyway, let's move on to your Skirmishers. So, moving left to right, basically from your worst unit to your best. At least that's roughly how I set up these units, FYI. We have your Ptolemaic Slingers, one of two core units that you get access to for Slingers. They only have a range of 165, so they're a really, really terrible slinger. Easily in the running for being one of the worst slingers you can get access to, although you do get 200 of them, so that is kind of nice. Some skirmishers, in fact quite a lot, don't have 200, instead they have 175, which is also true for your Judean Slingers. They are far better than the Ptolemaic Slingers, but these guys only have 175 men, so you do lose that 25 men edge. But statistically, they're just better across the entire board, range of 190, and they also have a armor-piercing damage of 15 on top of a weapon damage of 14. Now, their melee attack is still horrific at 5, and their defense at 4, so these guys are really bad. I really wouldn't want to use them in melee. But if you absolutely have to, or if you have maybe really veteran slingers that you want to try and get some extra use out of, and so their melee attack will be higher if they're veterans, that's when you'll want these guys to recharge heavily armored units and they'll hopefully get some kills. But yeah, don't count on them doing too well. But that's it for your slingers. You get 2 units that are a part of your core roster. Of course, you do get other AOR units as you begin to expand. Particularly, you'll want to be taking over roads to get their slingers. But anyway, you have some options, at least, with long range. And it doesn't necessarily stop there, because we have archers next. You have your Egyptian bowmen. Once again, we're seeing 200 men in this unit. Besides that, though, their statistics are pretty horrible. Range of 165, it could be worse, but it also really could be a lot better. So they're not very good. But then we jump up to your Judean archers. And once again, we see the statistics are improved. They also only have 175 men, so again we lose 25 men. But these Judeans do not have anything armor-piercing wise, so definitely don't rely on them to do too well in a melee engagement. However, they do have an armor of 20, which is kind of interesting, and I'm wondering if that's a little bit too high and that stat isn't accurate, but 20 armor for a single archer seems to be a bit much, since they're pretty low tier. But, I mean, that's what it says listed, so we have to trust it, right? 20 armor for this archer unit is nothing to scoff at, to be honest. I'm guessing it's coming from these cuirasses that they're wearing, but anyway, yeah, not a terrible unit, and a range of 175 is decent for an archer. After the Judeans, we move up to the best of the best, the Cretan archers. Some of the single best archer units in the entire DEI world, and it's not because of their range, because their range is actually really bad at only 150, but it's because of their damage. They have a missile damage of 18, 4 of which is armor piercing, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's more than what any other archer gets access to, so that's not bad at all. They still have an armor of 15 as well, and their melee attack and defense is actually respectable at 9 and 9 each. So these guys can last for a little bit in a melee engagement if they don't get charged by a unit that does really well on the charge. So these guys are definitely going to be useful for you. You will note they are different to the other Cretan archers you get access to in the game. For example, if you take over Knossos, you get access to different Cretans, or if you recruit Cretan archers as mercenaries. Although off the top of my head, from what I recall, the only difference is their armor, with the regular Cretan archers having more armor than the Egyptian Cretans at only 15 for these guys, but I thought they had 20 or 25 for their regular. But besides that, I believe their statistics are pretty much the same, especially in the range situations. So that's it for your Cretans. Very helpful, but that really low range is going to hurt them a little bit, especially when you're going into like Africa and you're fighting the Ethiopian archers. They're fantastic, and they will really give you a good run for your money. But that's it for your archers. You have a few different options, so that's definitely not bad. Nothing to scoff at. Again, good AOR units nearby. But then we move up to your Peltas, and here you only have 2 options. First up, we have your Cilician Peltas. These guys are actually not that bad. They have decent range stats, range at 90, missile damage at 22. But melee-wise, they're actually quite useful. Melee attack and defense of 7, but they, again, have an armor piercing, just like your early Judean slingers. These guys have an AP damage of 13 on top of a weapon damage of 18. So that's quite respectable indeed. That's getting you up to a total of 31 weapon damage from a Peltis unit. Their only real issue is no armor, literally no armor at 1, and 1 armor means that they don't have any, so they will get demolished if they get hurt, but if you recharge them into heavily armored units, these guys will do quite well, especially if you let them use all of their ammunition first. Might be a unit worth trying to use in online battles too, FYI. But then after that, we upgrade to the regular Peltis. These guys are just a solid mid-tier Peltis for you. You don't get any elite Peltis, unfortunately. You're not like Macedon or Epirus. But these guys also have a armor piercing damage, but it is just of 7. So a total weapon damage of 28. Melee attack and defense is at 9, which is okay, and their armor at 20. So not a bad unit. 175 man, as is your Cilician Peltis. But yeah, basically, you get a decent amount of variety in your skirmishing department. You will note, however, you don't have anything that would be classified as an elite. The closest to an elite would be your Cretan archers, but even then, they're going to get outranged by a lot of units, and that could really be a bit of a deal breaker for your low armored units that you get in your army. So that's it for your skirmishers. So now let's move on to your spearmen, pikemen, and anything holding a spear. So as you can see, we have quite a few pikemen available. Now this is absolutely the core of the Ptolemaic dynasty. You have a lot of different pikemen. Please do understand though, one thing that I probably should have already said, is that a lot of these units are locked behind reforms. The Furios reform and the Forax reforms. The Ptolemies are subject to the universal Greek reforms that are triggered, and a lot of your units are hidden behind the Furios reform. For example, this first pikeman unit that we're going to check out, the native pikemen, are actually locked behind the Furios reform. It's not something you would expect because they're not really a Furio style unit, but they are. And that can really catch you off guard if you're planning to use them early on. Although it doesn't take long to hit the Furios reforms anyway, just turn 50. So it's not a big deal, and there is other pikemen you can get. For example, your Chloroichoi pikemen, pretty mid-tier pikemen, and you get access to them on turn 1. So you do get pikes, it's just you won't get all of them early on. So yeah, your native pikemen, they're pretty solid though, pretty friggin' solid mid-tier unit for you. And despite them being just natives, they do have a good armor at 25, so very respectable pikeman unit to use. Nothing extra to say about them though, and that's going to be the case for a lot of your units. From the native pikemen, we jump up to the Chloroichoi pikemen. A lot of their statistics are only just slightly better, although the main difference is morale. Morale of 46 for the Chloroichoi, and your native pikemen only have a morale of 39. But besides that, the Chloroichoi just basically have a few extra points in basically every single category. So very good mid-tier pikeman unit for you to have. And the melee defense is actually very respectable at a solid 12, with 6 of that being your shield value. So they will have some protection against skirmisher fire, but not a lot. So do try to protect them from that. We then jump quite a ways up to your chosen native pikemen. Statistically, they're actually worse in some respects, for example, attack. However, they're higher in one major aspect, which is armor, with an armor of 35 compared to your Chloroichoi pikemen only having 28 armor. But again, because they're natives, though, they have less morale at just 43. So these guys are very useful for you. Not a bad unit to use at all, but you do need to weigh up basically your pros and cons. These guys have better armor but less morale, which is more important to you, and which is going to be more effective against whatever faction you know that they'll be fighting soon. But one thing worth noting so far is that all of your pikemen have the standard Sarissa pike that the Macedonians gave to the world, obviously, so that is good. These guys aren't using shorter pikes, although you do have some units that will, which we'll check out shortly. After your chosen native pikeman, though, we jump up to your Chloroch Forex pikeman. I'm sure I got that perfect. These guys, they look friggin' fantastic. I really love these shields too. Very, very nice. But yeah, basically just a step up in most categories. But basically, these guys are a step down in one single category, which is your base morale. Oh no, sorry, their step up, I should say. The base morale in the chosen native pikeman is 43. For your Florex pikeman, it's at 46. Besides that, every single thing about them is the same. The only difference might be their social class that they come from, which I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, not a bad unit. They look friggin' fantastic, but yeah, you do get access to better pikes. Speaking of which, we'll see them right now. Your Peltas pikemen. These guys are some of your more elite pikemen. However, you will notice that they don't have the standard Sarissa pike that the other pikemen do. Theirs is much shorter. It's still pretty much just as effective, and the main difference being that they have a little bit more mobility. Their speed is actually a solid 3, while the other pikemen were at 2 and below. These guys have better stats regarding melee attack and such. They only have an armor 28 though, so it's a little bit lower, but that does give them an extra maneuverability. And they have a good morale at 49, and bonus versus cav of 8, but bonus versus elephants at 25. That is chronic. Oh my goodness. So yeah, these guys will be very good elephant killers for you for sure. 256 men per unit, so very nice. After that though, we jump up to your Egyptian Royal Pikeman, which is one of your 2 infantry generals that you get access to. I can't bloody remember the other one. Oh no, it's the Galatians. Never mind. So yeah, this is one of your infantry units you get access to for your general. These guys would have to be probably the single best looking unit that you get access to in your whole roster. Like, look at these helmets, their uniforms, their shields. Oh my friggin' goodness gracious. They are indeed thick, dare I say it. Like, look at that helmet, man. Like, that's just beefy. He is ready to mess stuff up. These guys are using your standard Sarissa, so they're back to normal with that. So they won't be as mobile as the Peltas pikemen, although they still have the same speed, surprisingly. But yeah, other statistics are a little bit more reminiscent of your standard pikes, but they're just better in pretty much every single category. Most notably, they have a good armor of 35, but a base morale of 52. So that's very solid considering that they have a speed of 3 as well. So basically, these guys are just a very elite pikeman unit that you get access to. They will get beaten by the Seleucid elite pikemen, but not by a large margin. And if you're just doing a single player campaign, your pikemen will be more than enough to hold the enemy, or you outdo them with your skirmishers and cavalry. But that's it for all of your pikemen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units of pikemen. Now we move on to your spearmen, getting us at 10 units of spear wielding units in total, which is just disgusting. But anyway, moving down to like your just standard spearman style units, we have your carrion levies. Absolutely abysmal spearman unit. The only good thing about them is that they have a 300 man unit pool for each unit, so that's that. Moving on from that though, we have some Judean Therio spears. Pretty solid spearman unit overall, 300 men as per most Therio spears. Just, yeah, good stats across the board, nice armor 25, and the speed is at a decent 3 as well, so definitely a worthwhile using unit. Then you have your Galatian Clerach spearmen. These guys are basically Galatian Therio spears. But of course, because they're Galatian, these guys, for whatever reason, never wear armor. It's just a Galatian thing, man. But yeah, because they don't have that armor, though, they have a little bit extra skill in terms of melee attack and defense at 8 and 18 instead of 7 and 17. Besides that, though, their weapon damage is slightly higher. But yeah, their armor is only at 8, so I would probably just stick with the Judeans. It's not really worth using these guys, in my opinion. The only reason I would over the Judeans is if they came from a different social class. Which, being Galatian, they should, but then I'm not sure if the Judeans would be considered a core of the Egyptian social class, or if they would be considered foreigners. But the Galatians should be considered foreigners, at least in my opinion they should be. That makes sense. But anyway, that's it for your Galatian spearmen there. But it is not the end of all of your Galatian spearmen, as next up we have your Galatian Thorax spearmen. And now these guys are actually armored. The Galatians finally took a note or two from the Greeks and the Romans, and they're actually using heavy armor with a very solid armor of 35. Fantastic stats all around. It's just disgusting how powerful these guys can be. Their only issue compared to Furio Spears is that they're not as fast, and they only have 200 men per unit instead of 300. But besides that, though, the Thorax Spearmen are no joke and not to be messed with, and they do have usually some nice abilities, although it doesn't look like the Galatians have access to it. No, they don't. Oh, that's interesting. So your Galatian Thorax Spearmen do not have access to this square formation ability. However, your generic Thorax Spearmen do. And statistically speaking, they're actually better than the Galatians in every single way. And statistically speaking, they're actually better than the Galatians in a few different ways. That's in armor, morale, and melee defense. So if you can, you may as well recruit these Thorax Spearmen, because they also get the square ability and the defensive formation. Both of which, while they aren't vital to a Thorax Spearman doing well, they can really help you out when the time is right, especially when the enemy AI is trying to charge your Spearmen. And they can be useful in online battles for like denying an area of play. For example, if you are trying to like push up a certain street, or you're trying to flank around an enemy unit, having these guys in their square formation in a certain position can really help you out. So yeah, be mindful of where you want to place it, because it can help you out a fair bit. But that's it for all 10 units of Spearmen that you get access to. Now we'll go over the Swordsmen that you get access to, which is just 4 units, but we then have 2 Swordsmen over here that are AOR units that you will see a lot in your campaign. So, time for the Swordsmen. So first up we have the Thracian Chlorach Folksmen. Despite these guys being considered as Folksmen, they're actually not really all that great in terms of being like sword or Folksmen wielding units, really. They only have a melee attack and defensive 9 each, which isn't terrible, but it's not that great. Their armor is only 8, so that's obviously very weak. They have a charge bonus of 21, which is, you know, nothing special. It's okay. Weapon damage of 21, and a melee armor piercing of only 7. That 7 is a bit of a letdown, to be honest, and I'd kind of like to see it be increased, especially if their armor is going to be so low. Otherwise, I really wouldn't get these guys. I would instead just focus on using Swordsmen, using your really good AP wielding Peltus units instead, for at least for AP damage. But even though these guys have 300 men per unit, it's just not worth it in my opinion. And a sword unit I would use instead would be your Ptolemaic Swordsman. Although unfortunately these guys are once again locked behind the Aetherios reforms. But, I mean, statistically, they're better in the majority of ways compared to the Thracians. Obviously, they don't have the armor-piercing damage of the Thracians at only 3 compared to 7. But they still have a weapon damage of 23 and a melee defense of 15. That's pretty friggin' massive. And I'm sure a big part of that is to do with their shield. Let's double check. Yeah, shield value of 8, which is just monstrous. These guys will block a lot of skirmisher fire coming towards them as long as it's engaging them from the front. But yeah, just a really good mid to slash light swordsman unit for you. These guys are basically your Furio swords that you get access to. Their only kind of downfall is only an armor of 15, which isn't terrible, but it could be better. So yeah, do be aware of that. They will get annihilated eventually if they're going up against heavily armored swordsmen or getting hit by skirmishers from behind. But after that, we move up to your Ptolemaic Thorax Swordsman. Oh gosh, I'm getting tongue twisted with all this talking today, guys. We have a melee attack of 14, which is very nice. Melee defense of 11, which is a bit of a step back actually from the Ptolemaic Swordsman. But the big difference coming in with that armor of 35. These guys are legionnaire material. Their only kind of issue compared to Aetherios, besides the defense, is their numbers being only at 200 compared to 300 for the Ptolemaic Swordsman, aka Aetherios swords, because that's basically what they are. They do have a javelin though, as do the Ptolemaic Swordsman, so that's nice that this Thorax unit gets to keep a javelin. Base morale of 49 as well, so not a bad swordsman unit to use at all, although I'm not sure if I would want to use them as a main battle line unit. playing as Egypt, I would rather use pikes or good spearmen. Nice mobile spearmen instead. However, speaking of legionnaires, we actually have legionnaires available to Egypt. As far as I'm aware, this is the only faction that gets actual Roman units inside of their roster when it's not a Roman faction. These guys are called the Roman Traitor Legionnaires. I'm not too sure on the history and why these guys have been added to the Egyptian roster. I'm sure there's something accurate about it. The DEI team hardly ever implements anything that isn't historically accurate, if ever, at least not intentionally. So these guys are pretty freaking badass. I mean, they have these massive shields. Like, look at that. Whoo! These guys are looking baller. They have basically all the capabilities of, I would say, at least a Marian level legionnaire, if not a Imperial one. Probably more so Imperial, actually, because they have better armor at 38. But those helmets, they kind of look like... It's hard to tell if that's Imperial era or Marian level era. But either way, they're great. They have all the capabilities of a Roman legionnaire. They have testudo, the repel cavalry formation. They have defensive formation. They have a hollow square. They also have a single javelin to toss. Base morale of 49, which is pretty solid. Armor of 38, like I said. Melee defense of 15 and attack of 11. Their only weakness really is no armor piercing at just 4 and a charge bonus of only 18. Although it is worth mentioning that they do also only have a speed of 2, so they're a little bit slow, but they are just so heavily armored, and they're really, really cool. To get these guys, though, you have to wait until your thorax reforms hit, and then you will get access to them. So keep that in mind, pretty please. But anyway, as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been any restrictions on how many of these you can recruit. I've been able to do it for online battles, I know that for sure, where I can just recruit as many as I like, and I can do it for... my Egyptian test campaigns I've done. That might change in the future because, I mean, it's kind of a bit OP that you can just get however many legionnaires you want. But I guess also at the same time, these guys won't be available until basically the mid to late game of your Egyptian playthrough. So that's fair enough, but I think for online battles, I'd like to see them be restricted. But anyway, that's it for your core swordsman. Now let's get on to your 2 AOR swordsmen. The first of your AOR swordsmen is, of course, the Galatian cell swords. These guys do not have very good armor, just 15, although it could be worse considering they're Galatian. An attack of 13, defense of 11. Although surprisingly, they only have a charge bonus of 19. Being Celtic, I would imagine they would have had a much more powerful charge bonus, especially considering they're Galatians. Galatians are known for their ferocity in battle. I mean, Egyptians are going out of their way to recruit their services. So, in my opinion, maybe these guys could be a little bit better on the charge, but they do have 300 men per unit. They have some armor, good melee attack. Weapon damage overall is at 30, but only 2 of that is armor piercing, so it's a bit of a letdown. But the weapon damage at 30 is okay, so this is a unit that you'll be using a lot in your early game. This is an AOR unit you'll get access to very, very quickly, and you'll be wanting to use them quite a lot. And I really recommend you try to, because they're fantastic. Just a really nice, cost-effective early game unit for you to use. But one thing that's kind of conflicting is that they only have an armor of 15, but then you have men like this in the unit that are wearing their full-on chainmail, nice iron helmet as well. I mean, there's not a lot of them, but there's enough to be... to where you would question, like, should these guys have an armor only 15, or maybe bump it up to 20, maybe 25, or probably just 20 at least to keep it balanced. But yeah, I'd like to see that possibly adjusted, just because it would make a bit more sense in my mind. But anyway, that's just me thinking off the top of my head. Then we have the Galatian thorax swordsmen. Now these guys are proper powerful with a melee attack of 15, defense of 12. Charge bonus is at 21, so it's standard but decent. Total weapon damage of 32 and an armor of 41. These guys are very, very nice to have. I believe your other Egyptian general you get access to is a Galatian Royal Guard unit, but these guys are called Galatian thorax swords. So I'm not sure if that Royal Guard unit is only available as a general, or if it's the same unit as this, but it's just been renamed. But basically, anyway, you get access to these guys obviously after the thorax reforms. Um, just a really powerful swordsman unit that you get in the late game. These guys will be great at storming walls for you and captured cities, and just being very maneuverable on the battlefield to come and help plug up holes in your battle line, and they'll do very, very well. Very nice swordsman unit to have. One javelin unit though, and nothing else special about them. They're just fantastic stats, basically. Really, really good stats. But ladies and gentlemen, that is it for your infantry. We're now done with all of your infantry. You do get access to a lot more in terms of mercenaries and AOR units when you're playing as such a large faction as Egypt. However, for the sake of this overview, this is it for your core roster in terms of infantry. Now let's get onto your cavalry, followed by your elephants at the end. So let's do it. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, we're almost there. We're almost done with the military section. First up, we have your Mysian cavalry. Now, this is a skirmisher cav unit. It's a javelin wielding skirmisher cav unit. Very fast with a good solid speed of 8. Charge bonus is pretty standard at 38, but they have decent melee stats actually. Melee attack of 11 and a defense of 10. The biggest issue is of course being only with an armor of 11. But because of those good melee stats, these guys wouldn't be terrible at fighting very light cavalry in an extended engagement or chasing down enemy skirmishers. These guys would do quite well with that indeed. Ammunition is at 6. However, that is your only properly dedicated skirmisher cav unit you get access to. You have no archer cavalry units, and the other 2 units that we're about to check out that are, technically skirmisher cav aren't dedicated skirmisher cav. So there is going to be a bit of a downgrade in terms of skirmishing potential. And we see that with your Tarentine cavalry, a very notorious unit for their flexibility and overall usefulness. They have a good armor 23, they have that high speed again, but unfortunately they only have an ammunition of 4 javelins instead of 6. So that's definitely going to eat at them a little bit. However, they have great melee stats with a melee attack of 9 and a defense of 13, charge bonus of 48. So these guys can do some skirmishing, and then they can engage mid to light cavalry tier units in an extended engagement and do very well. They're not bad whatsoever. Very, very good in fact. Very cost effective, 120 men in that unit, the same as the last cav unit we looked at. However, we then jump up to the late Royal Squadron, which is only 100 men. And while these guys are a skirmisher cav unit, again with just using javelins, they only have an ammunition of 3. So really what these guys are is more of a melee cavalry unit that gets access to javelins. Because their melee stats are off the charts. A melee attack of 13 combined with a melee defense of 14, charge bonus of 40, and an armor of 45. Weapon damage total of 35. These guys are just absolutely next level. Incredible unit. A lot of white going on here. I'm guessing... not too sure why, but they actually look pretty badass, so I'm not going to complain at all. But yeah, just statistically speaking, they're pretty disgusting in how powerful they are. Their biggest issue, though, is that they take a step backwards in the skirmishing department in terms of ammunition and range and missile damage. It's not a big difference for range and missile damage, but it is a difference. So be wary of that. And also their speed is only at 6 instead of 8 compared to the other 2 units. So you might want to use the Tarentines to be a lot more cost effective in your armies. But that's it for your skirmisher cav. Now let's move on to your melee cavalry and check them out. So we're back to your melee cavalry, and we have your Ptolemaic spear cav here. Pretty much the lowest tier of your melee cav that you get access to, but that's actually not bad because they are still very solid. They're a mid-tier unit. They have an armor of 28, melee attack of 8, melee defense of 9. Did I say 8 for armor or 28? But it's 28 armor. Weapon damage overall 31, charge bonus 47. Just a very solid mid-tier cav unit. Once again, we're seeing an emphasis on melee engagements for your cavalry. So you definitely will want to be wanting to keep that in mind where you're going up against like the lightly armored Arabian or African nations that focus heavily on skirmisher cav. These guys do not have any javelin, although they have 120 men in their unit and they have a speed of 8. So just a fantastic mid-tier unit. Very, very nice. Specializes in dealing with enemy cav for sure. We then have your Thracian light cavalry. And now these guys are a little bit weird because they're a step up and a step down. For example, they have a whopping melee defense of 13 compared to 9 of the Ptolemaic Spear Cav. But then they only have an armor of 18 compared to 28 of the Ptolemaic Spear Cav. And the speed is slightly slower at 7, which doesn't make a lot of sense because they have less armor, but I'm guessing that's just for lore or something to do with them not having the same horse as the Egyptians, whatever. But yeah, the Thracian Cav will definitely be helpful for you in extended melee engagements. Their armor is going to be a bit of a letdown, but it's not that bad, although their base morale is only at 39, but that's the same for the Ptolemaic Spear Cav, so it's not terrible base morale, but it's not that great either. Could be better. But then moving on from that, we go to your Egyptian Linen Cavalry, or Egyptian Linen Cataphracts, I should say. These guys are a cataphract unit, however, I included them in the melee section just because you can use them as a dedicated melee cav unit if you like. They actually don't even have a lance, they just have their spears. Melee attack of 11, defense of 10, which is very good for a cataphract unit. Weapon damage 31, all the stats are looking good, speed is at a decent 6, armor is at a 41, and of course, you just have the absolute badass linen looking look. Looky. Wow. Their only big downfall is only 100 men compared to 120 for most of your other cav units. For at least most of them, but not all. But anyway, moving on from your cataphract unit, we then have the late Sacred Squadron. Now these guys are a little bit more focused on shock cavalry as they have a longer spear, basically a lance right here. However, once again, I included them here because they have a whopping melee defense of 13. So these guys are definitely nothing to be messed with. Charge bonus of 51, a total weapon damage of 34, armor of 47, base morale of 54. Their only slight letdown is a speed of 6, and they only have 100 men in their unit. But just wow, these guys are elite. They're very, very powerful, very good at dealing with other enemy heavy cavalry, especially if you get some spearmen in there to help them out. But yeah, just they look fantastic, a lot of variety, very nice variety too. It's not just random stuff thrown together. Their officer looks badass. Super impressive with this unit. I'm really looking forward to trying that out in online battles perhaps. But now let's move on to your dedicated shock cav units. So please keep in mind, these guys are your dedicated shock cav units. That means that they are not designed at all for extended melee engagements. However, you can use your melee cav that I just went over for the same purpose as these guys. So they can basically act as like shock cav units. So don't feel like you only have to use these two units to deal shock damage. In fact, it's best not to, although some of them do have their uses. For example, these Sarissa Lancers are definitely a very cost-effective unit. They have a very good charge bonus of 63, good attack of 12. Unfortunately, their defense is at a pathetic 4, and their armor is only at 13. But they have a very good speed of 8, and they also have the Thessalian horse. So they're going to be very fast and very large, so they'll be very powerful on the charge. Although these Sarissa Lancers, it doesn't seem like it. These guys do not have the diamond formation ability, like say the Thessalian cavalry do, which is interesting. I'm not sure if these Sarissa Lancers do if you play as Macedon. I'm not sure if they get the diamond formation, but either way, these guys do not get it, and that is a big difference. But yeah, they're not bad. 120 men per unit. If you want a dedicated shock cav unit, these guys are your cost-effective option to go to. Just don't let them get stuck in any kind of long-winded engagement. And then we move on to your Sacred Squadron Cavalry unit. These guys are the same as your General, which is also the Sacred Squadron unit. Statistically, though, because they're not your General, they are slightly lower in a couple of categories. That is, their speed is actually slightly higher, than your General, at a 7, whereas your General's at a 6. But your General has 47 armor, and the Sacred Squadron right here only has 41 armor. But besides that, they're the exact same statistically speaking. They even both have only 100 men in their unit. These guys have no shields, so that's a big issue for them. So that means that their defense is super low, which it absolutely is at only a melee defense of 6. But then they have a charge bonus of 60, weapon damage total of 33, and a bonus versus infantry. So not a bad shot cav unit, but that is all it is. It's just a shot cav unit. I really think you would be better off really trying to invest your money in getting just very solid melee cavalry units, or like your Tarantines, or for shock damage, what you could get is your elephants, of course. We can't talk about Egypt without talking about elephants. Unfortunately, though, Egypt is one of the weakest factions when it comes to elephants. I think even Carthage has better elephants than compared to Egypt. You just don't have many of them. I think it's 18 per unit. Let's just double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So yeah, 18 elephants per unit. They don't have any kind of skirmishing capability. These guys who are riding them don't like throw javelins or anything like that. And they have almost no armor. They're pretty small elephants too, so they won't do well against other enemy elephants. Although they will do very well, of course, against enemy infantry. Just like any other elephant, they have a very big mass stat that helps them deal massive damage, knocks over enemy units. And it's almost kind of good, though, that they only have 18 elephants instead of like 36 or whatever, because these guys can be moved around the battlefield a little bit easier. You can make them into like smaller combat groups like this. So if you want to like maybe keep them, say like this group here is my main battle line, keep them in the middle, you could push them through your own main battle line quite easily. Or just like make a little gap for them quite easily. And then these guys could just cruise on through. Like, that's not a bad gap at all. That's really not hard to do, especially in online battles. So, yeah, not a lot to say about those elephants, except I believe they're the smallest, or at least the second smallest in the game. It's either theirs or the Carthaginian elephants are the smallest. And size does matter, ladies and gentlemen, especially with elephants. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for the military of Egypt. Oh my goodness, my throat is sore after doing all of this talking. But we still have the verdict section to go over. So let's do a very, very quick verdict for Egypt, and then we will end it there. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for sticking around and watching this overview for as far as you have. I really do appreciate it. I am trying to shrink the size of these overviews, but sometimes, every now and then, we get a big powerhouse faction like Egypt, and it's just unavoidable to not make it go for a very long time. But anyway, I just want to reiterate a few very big points, but I'll do it very briefly, and then we'll give the difficulty rating. So first off, your economy is one of the best in the entire game. Your province of Egyptos is one of the best provinces in the game, and with the new wonders that are being added in the Grand Campaign Revised submod, it's going to be out of control almost. It's almost too powerful, to be honest with you. And if you're like an experienced DEI player, you will know how powerful that province can be. We're talking earning tens of thousands of income just from a single province, possibly even more than that. So yeah, your economy is one of the best in the game, so you can afford to be spamming money on mercenaries, AOR units, elite units that you get access to, good cavalry, elephants. You should be able to afford whatever you like, as long as you make common sense decisions with your economy, like building up cities as quickly as you can, and building up buildings that give you money, getting trade agreements with powerful factions like Carthage and Rome, for example. It's just basic common sense stuff. It's not really anything too secretive that's going to make your economy do really well, at least not for this faction. You also have one of the best navies that there is. You have a better navy than Carthage, arguably at least. You have a great land military as well. You have a great population situation for the most part. And strategically, your capital is placed in a very good position to defend, at least from land incursions. Naval incursions might catch you off guard when you're fighting other big factions, for example the Seleucids, Rome, maybe Carthage, although Carthage usually gets wiped out anyway. But when you're fighting big Mediterranean powers, you might want to be a bit careful of defending your city from a naval invasion. But besides that, you know where the enemies are going to be coming from, because there's those narrow little strategic corridors of land that basically deny access to anywhere else but through those corridors. For example, through Palestine and Syria, they have to follow the coastline, otherwise they're going to be suffering attrition. So you know where the enemies will be coming from. That will help you out massively. And of course, you also have the Nile and a couple other rivers to the east that will help you defend your position. Your only issue that I can see really is you let your public order issues get out of control, which I can understand for newer players not knowing how to handle it, especially considering because you have the dual cultural system for Egypt. But then again, you just have so much money, you should be able to buy whatever you need to deal with that. You could even lower your taxes and still make fantastic money, and will help you out a lot with your public order. Another thing that will be difficult is these Seleucids usually declare war on you within 5 turns. You can try and buy their affection and love and make them not hate you instantly. It's hard to do though, and yeah, you have to really dedicate a lot of serious money to the Seleucids for them not to come and fight you straight away. But even if they do fight you straight away, just try to delay the war with them as long as you can. Don't go invading them straight away. Instead, just defend your lands, and then after you defend them for a little while, their satrapies will hopefully rebel, or they'll also just get embroiled in other wars with neutral factions near them. And that's when you start invading and start picking them apart. So the Seleucids shouldn't be a big issue for you as long as you use some common sense strategy. At least in my opinion, it appears to be common sense. But the rest of the factions in the game should be more than easy enough for you to deal with. Parthia and Bactria, or cavalry heavy factions, might be a bit frustrating, but the AI is really bad at handling micromanaging their cavalry. So as long as you bring in cavalry to counter theirs, and you still have your good infantry corps to take their cities, they won't be a big issue at all. You should be able to handle it very easily. And so that's it. Unfortunately, you don't really have that many negatives. And I say unfortunately because I kind of wish Egypt was a little bit more of a challenge. But they just simply aren't really that much of a challenge. So that brings me to our difficulty rating, which I am leaving at a 3 out of 10. They were almost a 2 out of 10, which would have made them very easy. But a 3 out of 10 makes them just easy, in my opinion. The reason that they're not very easy is because they have the dual cultural system, which is going to be an issue for you basically throughout your whole campaign. And as the campaign progresses, the Egyptian culture will continue rising in most of your provinces. And if you don't take steps to counter it early on, then it can lead to some very frustrating civil wars and public order issues that you might not be prepared for if you haven't played a faction like this. That combined with the rush of these Seleucids can be a little bit overwhelming to newer players, so that's why I didn't want to say that this was very easy. But I mean, for a standard DI player, it probably is very easy, to be honest, but still, I wanted to play this a little bit safer and just go with a solid 3 out of 10. These guys are easy. They have too many things going for them for it to be a hard campaign, at least for now. Maybe they'll get some changes in the future, but Egypt kind of is in its prime moment at the time period of DEI once the Ptolemies have taken over and solidified their position and their rule, which they have by the point that DEI starts. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for Egypt finally. So thank you all so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I shall see you in the next one.